Today's Info2Go is entitled Summer Food Service Program, How to Become a Sponsor or a Site. Just some housekeeping things. During our webinars, everyone is muted upon entry. We ask that you use the chat feature to ask any questions and to provide any comments. You can also raise your hand if you have a question, if we haven't seen it in the chat, but we have Stacy and Emily both helping watch for that. And afterwards, you'll receive an email with a link to the archive. The archive, we usually try to condense it a bit, so things like me talking right now aren't included, but you will get that archive in a few days, and along with a request to provide us with an evaluation. So it's just part of our process for all of our professional development opportunities. So my name is Tammy Hollyhouse. I work here at the Idaho Commission for Libraries, and I'm your host for this meeting. And I am going to turn it over to Emily, my colleague, to do an introduction.
Thanks, Tammy. Welcome everybody to this session. Before I introduce Marianne, I just want to do a quick shout out. This is a wonderful program. I hope you do follow through if you're interested in doing it. It has always been, from my perspective, a win-win from the library point of view. And now that we have seen how the pandemic has shown a light on food insecurity with our children throughout the state, it makes it just so much more important. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Marianne Lybee, who is the Summer Food Service Coordinator and the Children and Adult Care Feeding Coordinator too. And so, Marianne, I'll let you get started. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Emily and Tammy. Good afternoon, everyone. As Emily mentioned, I am the Summer Food Service Coordinator here at the state agency, State Department of Education, Child Nutrition Programs. A little bit about myself. I actually have been in my position just a little over a year. I started last February, and then I think 2-3 weeks later was when the pandemic hit and everything shifted. But as I was mentioning earlier to all the ladies, prior to coming to the state agency, I had worked for a nonprofit for the Idaho Food Bank. I was there for 9 years, and I actually was a sponsor of the Summer Food Service Program, along with the other nutrition services programs like the Backpack Program and the School Pantry Program and Cooking Matters. And so I've been in my field for quite a long time. I have a social work background, and food access has always just been my passion, really learning that from the get-go when I started at the food bank as an intern. So very happy to be here with you all. I do have a presentation, as I was mentioning earlier too, when I was working with Emily for this presentation. We blocked out 2 full hours, but we are not anticipating for it to be that long. But if you guys have any questions at all, at the end of my presentation, I'll open it up. And as Tammy mentioned, please feel free to put that in the chat. I'll also have a slide of my contact information. So if you would like to have a side conversation to find out, a little bit more detail of the program, I'd be more than happy to do that. So with that, I'm going to pull up and share the screen here. I'm sure we've all been so equipped with technology now with the past year of the pandemic. So let me get this up and just minimize this. Perfect. And I hope everyone can see my slide there.
We can.
Oh, perfect. Awesome. So again, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for letting me conduct this presentation on the Summer Food Service Program and how libraries can work together to nourish healthy bodies and minds. And also on a little side note too, Tammy and Emily, if you guys would like me to share this presentation with you all as just, a PDF copy, I can certainly send that over to you guys if anyone else would like to just keep a copy for yourself.
That would be great. We would love that.
Awesome. All right. So the Summer Food Service Program, it is a USDA program that relies heavily on innovation and collaboration efforts to reach children in need. Collaboration with valued partners such as the libraries across our state is heavily encouraged to really raise awareness about the nutrition gap for children and families in low-income areas when school is not in session. And really a successful summer meals program, it really requires sharing ideas with other key stakeholders, other partners, and really just a blend of collaboration that's diverse, but really united in a single vision. And that is to feed more hungry children during the summer months. So let me click on right there. Perfect. And I wonder if I can actually minimize this so you guys can see the top part.
We are seeing what is the Summer Food Service Program?
Oh, perfect. Thank you for that. Oh, yes. Yeah, perfect. Thank you for letting me know that you guys are seeing the top part. On my view here, I have a little top panel that's blocking it. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys can see that on your end. Perfect. So thank you for that confirmation. So what is the Summer Food Service Program, or as we call it, the Summer Meals Program, or SFSP? So the Summer Meals Program, or SFSP, was really established to, oh my goodness, hold on a second, sorry about that. It was really established to ensure that low-income children continue to receive nutrition meals when school is not in session. As you guys all know, during the school year session, the school meals program are currently happening during the school year. However, when school is out, those programs are not happening, and so the summer feeding program really fills in that gap. And as we all know, hunger does not take a summer vacation, so free meals are provided to all children ages 1 to 18 during the summer months. So who can be a sponsor of the program? And I'll kind of walk through just the different layers on what USDA does, as well as the Department of Education, and then really trickles down to the sponsor level. So who can be a sponsor of the program? The USDA's Food and Nutrition Services Department oversees the program on the national and regional level. And they really administer and regulate all of the program regulations and requirements that trickles down to each state agencies. And each state has the either a state agency, an alternate state agency, or the Department of Education that oversees it for their own state. So in our state of Idaho, the Department of Education Child Nutrition Programs administers the program for our state. And then really how it comes down to is in the local level is the agencies that would like to sponsor the program. And so what they can do is they can apply to be a sponsor of the program and approved by the state agency. And these sponsoring organizations are responsible for overseeing the program operations in their community level. And really sponsors, by following program regulations and requirements, sponsors receive federal reimbursements from the state agency to cover the administrative and operating costs of preparing and serving meals to eligible children at one or more meal sites. So what are the sponsoring organizations, or who are they? So a sponsoring organization must be a public or a private nonprofit school food authorities, or school districts as we would call them, a public or a private nonprofit college or university, a public or a private nonprofit residential summer camp, a unit of local, county, or municipal, state, or federal government, or any other type of private nonprofit organizations. So what are some of the program requirements? As we all know, it is a government funded program. And so there are specific program requirements that sponsors and state agencies must follow. So sponsors may operate a summer feeding site at one or more two locations in their community. Majority of the time, the summer meal sites are school locations, typically where summer school sessions are happening, park locations, and low-income housing complex or apartment complex in the community. And these locations are the actual locations where meals are served and children eat in a supervised setting. So eligible sites are those that serve children in low-income areas or those that serve specific group of low-income children. Sponsors must provide documentation that propose sites that meet the income eligibility criteria required by the government. Most sponsors establish site eligibility on a need and openness. If a site is located in a needy area where 50% or more of children residing in that area are eligible for the free and reduced price school meals, and meals are made available to all children 18 years and younger, and it's in the area considered first come, first served basis, these sites are considered open sites. And there's no income, no identification needed for these open sites. The two primary sources of data that may be used to determine whether the area that will be serving the children are eligible are through the school data and the census map data. To qualify a site, a sponsor may use data from an elementary, a middle, or a high school, as long as the site is located in the attendance area of the school that's at least 50% free and reduced. And sponsors may also document the area eligibility of their proposed sites on the basis of the census information. And so it's really targeting that, again, that low income, high impoverished area to ensure that, the program is serving the population that it's intended for. Now, once an area eligibility is established, that duration of determination for that site eligibility is for 5 years. So let's say, a park location was determined as eligible this summer. They are good for the next 5 summers. So under COVID-19, as we all know, we have been dealing with this for the past year now. And really, COVID-19 and the pandemic really changed the operations, like I mentioned earlier, mid-March of last year. And so there's been a lot of flexibilities and shifting of operations. So for this slide, for this information, I just want to go over some of those flexibilities that have been offered, that are still currently being offered, that our sponsors can operate under. So under the SFSP program regulations, participants are required to consume the meals on site. That's kind of one of the biggest program regulations under the summer feeding program, is that a child cannot take the food home with them. They can't share the food with another child, or they can't share the food with a parent. But really the main thing is that if a child receives a meal through the summer feeding program, they have to consume the meal on site. They can't take it home with them. Additionally, parents or guardians cannot pick up any meals or be served a meal for a child who's not present. And so again, it's kind of what we call a direct service or a point of service, where that bag of that meal is directly handed to the child, to the eligible child partaking in the program. And then lastly, one of the program regulations is that one meal per distribution must be distributed to a child. However, under the COVID-19 pandemic, USDA has issued multiple nationwide waivers to offer flexibilities regarding the summer food service program regulations. And sponsors across the state, across the nation, can elect to opt into these waivers, to these nationwide waivers, by contacting the state agency. So under the COVID-19 nationwide waivers, sponsors can offer non-congregate feeding. So that just means that a child does not have to stay at that meal location and have to consume their meals on site. They can actually take it home with them, or if they're I don't know, with a relative, then they can take that home with them. They don't have to stay at that feeding location. Another flexibility that has been offered is that a parent or a guardian of that child can pick up the meal or meals for that child, even if that child is not present. So a lot of the times, kids are staying home, maybe the mom or the dad or grandma, don't want the child to go anywhere and be exposed with other people. That parent or that guardian can pick up the meals for that child, even if the child is not with them. So that has been one of the flexibilities that's been offered this during the pandemic. And then the second to last thing I wanted to mention is sponsors can provide more than one meal type per distribution. So under program regulations, sponsors can offer breakfast, morning snack, lunch, afternoon snack, and supper to an eligible participant. However, as per program regulations, there has to be some time elapsed that has occurred between one meal type can be served before the next meal type can be served. However, under the nationwide waiver, we do have a flexibility where a sponsor can provide, let's say, a breakfast and a lunch together in one distribution, and then that child can take those meals home and consume it at home. And so that's been really one great flexibility that's been offered this past year, is that the child or even the parent can pick up multiple meal type, so that they're not having to come to the site more than once per day, and be able to take those meals home and consume it at home. And then lastly, sponsors can elect to operate a site in an area that is less than 50% free and reduced. As you guys recall on our previous slides, that in order for a site to qualify, it has to meet that 50% minimum threshold, again, to really target the low-income area, high-impoverished neighborhood. However, with this area eligibility nationwide waiver, we are able to approve a site that's below 50% free and reduced, and we work that out with that specific sponsor on why they're proposing a site that's 50% below 50%. And so those are some of the flexibilities that has been heavily utilized the past 12 months. And all of these nationwide waivers are good through summer 2021. We did receive an extension of those waivers a couple weeks ago. And so these nationwide waivers are in effect until September 30th is the date that we have for this year. All right, so then these next few slides, I wanted to go over specifically on regarding how to support the summer food service program. So really the first thing is to spread the word, help promote the program and spread the word. Getting the word out to families about the summer meals program is a key factor to really ensure that children have access to good nutrition during the summer months. We do have bookmarks that we have been, I believe last year was the year that my predecessor was planning to distribute all of our bookmarks, but then obviously with the pandemic starting, we couldn't do that. So we still have some bookmarks available to distribute to different locations as a way to really promote the program. So those are still available. And the state agency, we can mail those bookmarks, to various locations, to various library locations to distribute to children and families, obviously if feasible and possible under the public health emergency. Additionally, libraries can promote the program through posting flyers, posting on a bulletin board, maybe the library website, or really any other means of communication, maybe even social media, to really just get the word out there, and make sure that children knows where to access a summer feeding site. The other one that can really help out is to really share the next two information, the next two bulletin point that I indicated on my slide here. The one of them is the Summer Meal Site Finder. This is the USDA website to locate the nearest summer feeding locations in the community. And so even, a child, a parent, or even a guardian can type in their address or even a zip code, and it actually locates the nearest summer feeding locations. And it provides, when they're operating, what time, the meals are being served, and contact information for those sponsors. And then the other one that we want to make sure that we're sharing to really help promote the program is this summer meals text number. So again, a child, a parent, really anyone can text summer meals to 97779. And it works similar to the site finder where they would locate the nearest summer feeding location where they are located. And again, it has all that information of, the address of that location, when they're operating, all of that stuff. I do want to make a side note too that it's really important for families to have access to these two, the site finder as well as the summer meals text, because some sponsors, they vary in when they operate the program. Some operate the programs throughout the whole summer. Some maybe it might just be 6 to 8 weeks. And so it's very important for families to know of when the program is starting and when it is ending, because I would hate for, a family to come to one park location, but they actually ceased the operation, to previous week. And so we always want to make sure that we're providing that information. And so that's really a great way to get information to the families and parents. So the next slide here is really creating a partnership. This is another great way to support the summer feeding program. Libraries can contact local program operators or local sponsors in their community, and really just start a conversation on how they can partner and collaborate to ensure that the summer feeding program operation is a successful one. Library staff library staff can even volunteer and conduct, a book mobile activity, and read to the participants, or even have like a library book exchange to provide enrichment activities during the summer months. As I mentioned earlier, prior to coming to the state agency, I was a sponsor of the program. I worked for a nonprofit that worked for as a sponsor of the program for 9 summers. And we not only provided obviously meals to provide to the kiddos, but then we also did enrichment activities and physical activities with the kids. We found that by providing meals, but then also adding on, reading days or different physical activities that the kids can do and really incorporate those two together, it really increased participation at all of our summer feeding locations. And so I heavily encourage just again, different libraries, different locations to identify a local sponsor. And see if, just really figure out ways on what you guys, can do together to really increase participation and maintain that participation throughout the summer operation. The third slide that I wanted to review over to, again, to support the program is either become a sponsor or become a site, a summer feeding site for the program. So let's see. Libraries can support the program by serving a meal or a snack. And you can become a sponsor of the program if interested, and of course, operationally feasible. There's definitely more conversation to be had on if a library or if a location is interested in becoming a sponsor. And I can provide additional information regarding that, manuals and step-by-steps on what to do. And so if this is something that you guys for one of the locations is interested in doing, I would be really more than happy to have that more in-depth conversation on how to become a sponsor. The other side too is really becoming a summer feeding site. As I mentioned earlier, contacting a local program sponsor if a collaboration partnership could work out. Another way to do that is by offering to be a summer feeding site. Really providing that extra access or that additional access for food for these little kiddos. Contacting and collaborating with existing sponsors in your community really will help facilitate and support supplying meals, additional meals to the children. And sponsors may need extra staff or even volunteers to help with meal distribution. So how can this partnership benefit libraries across our state? Libraries, really, you guys are the leader in the fight against summer learning loss. And you guys are our natural partners and ideal sponsors or sites, summer feeding sites for the summer meals program. By combining meals with reading programs or library-based sponsors or summer meal sites really, again, nourish children's bodies and minds. And you guys are already in a building or in a location that's safe and accessible for families and children to gather. And you guys' location exists in nearly all the communities across our state. Summer meals, again, it benefits children, but when school is out, really low income children relies heavily on school meals and are harmed by summer hunger and achievement gaps. Libraries are in a unique position to bridge both gaps at once by providing the healthy meals and enrichment activities our children need to thrive all year round. Really, by partnering and collaborating with a summer feeding sponsors through becoming a meal site or, again, providing enrichment activities, library week and staff can promote year-round reading as well as boost summer feeding participations across our communities. And this will not only strengthen relationships in your community and all of our communities, but also really ensure that children have what they need to be able to return to school in the fall, really ready to learn. So one last thing that I wanted to mention, some of the outreach strategies that myself and the other summer feeding coordinator, Dominique, have talked about is one, the state agency will place a request for the governor to proclaim a summer food service program week sometime in June. And this proclamation, really our goal with that is it will really just call attention to the summer meals program across our state, and will hopefully support the promotion of accessing the program throughout the summer months. We also encourage our sponsors to plan or partake in kickoff events to build awareness among parents, recruit volunteers, and really just overall create excitement around the summer meals program. And definitely, we heavily encourage additional events throughout the summer that can help sustain the enthusiasm to keep participation high throughout the operation. Now, we totally understand that, again, under the COVID-19 operation and the pandemic and the health emergency, that's going to look very different. And we fully support on however we can help as far as just, again, providing this outreach and garner different ideas on what the state agency can support our sponsors and feeding sites to really continually promote the program. But hopefully we are in the near end, and hopefully by next summer we can return to the traditional summer feeding operation. So these ideas are really something that we look forward to implementing again. So with that, I would like to open the floor for any questions that you may have. As I mentioned earlier, it's the information that I've shared with you all is just a really broad overall information of the program. And so if there's any specific questions or any clarifications that I can provide, I would be more than happy to do that now. So with that, Tammy and Emily, that is what I have for you all.
Thank you so much. Anybody have any questions? Marianne?
Let's see, I'm trying to see.
You can go ahead and put your questions into the chat box. Or looks like we have a hand raised, so let me take a look at that. Colleen, Colleen, I just gave you permission to speak. I feel so powerful. What is your question?
Tammy, I view you as powerful. I was typing it. I was like, oh, that's right. I'm supposed to type it. Hi, Marianne, my long lost. I was wondering, hi, if you could, well, if I could ask, do you, as the Board of Education, have any requirements for folks that volunteer, or do you rely on the host agency to set up things like requirements for background checks, et cetera?
That's a great question, Colleen, and good to see you. Good to hear your voice.
You too.
Yeah, that's a great question. So as far as the program requirements with volunteers, it's the same requirements for staffing of the sponsors. There is some specific requirements that a sponsor could implement outside what the state agency requires. The state agency, our requirement really falls on that civil rights training. So really anyone who will have direct communication or direct contact with children will need to complete a civil rights training. And that also goes for volunteers of the program. What's really great is the state agency, we actually already have the training in place. It's either a video or this one-page, what we call a frontline staff civil rights training. And so sponsors can easily just access that through our website and then utilize that format to train their volunteers and staff. As far as the background check or any additional requirements, sponsors are able to conduct that to ensure that, people that they're recruiting to partake in the meal service or doing even the activities have those proper check-ins and checkpoints to make sure that it is safe for the participants. But really the state agency side, that the first step for us is that civil rights training that we do require our sponsors to complete with their volunteers and with their staff. Great question, Colleen. Thank you.
Marianne, we have a question from Julie. What is the cutoff for getting approval to be a site?
That's a great question, Julie. So currently right now, we do have sponsors starting to plan for their summer feeding operation. What's been a little side note too, what's been one of the biggest changes that's currently happening is that school districts are actually operating the summer feeding program right now, but it's been at their school locations. But majority of our sponsors, majority of our school district sponsors, they usually operate it at park locations as well. And so right now they're operating it at the school locations, but they are gearing up and preparing for their summer operation. And we do require for their applications to be submitted the first Friday of May. So that we have time to review it and, just do checkpoints and all of that stuff. And so if, let's say, a library location wants to get a hold of a sponsor and, want to collaborate of either being a summer feeding site or multiple sites, really that first checkpoint or that first due date that we want to keep an eye out for is that first Friday of May.
We have another one. How can we determine whether our library site is in a good geographical location? I looked at the map briefly and there are sites nearby.
Good. Yes. Yep. So that summer meal site finder that will help you locate, all the locations that's currently happening at the school locations. But definitely keep in mind that will be changing for the summer operation. And so let's say, if one site is near your locations right now, if it's a school location, it might not be happening or it might not be operating this summer. So again, really that first step is contacting that sponsor in your local community, and just start the preliminary conversations of what their plans are for the summer, what locations they may be thinking, and there might be new locations that they may be implementing, but really the first checkpoint is that area eligibility. Let's say you're thinking of a library location. If it's within a school boundary line that's at least 50% free and reduced, that site will qualify. And then you can also utilize the census data. And then again, just on a little side note, we do have that area eligibility waiver available. But if it's a site that already qualifies, then obviously that nationwide waiver won't be needed.
Thank you, Marianne. Can you talk a little bit more about being a sponsor versus a site? Can a library be both, or would they need to find a sponsor in order to operate a site?
That's a great question. Thank you, Emily. So really, so to become a sponsor of the program, you do take on obviously that contractual agreement between the state agency and the library itself, as far as the implementation and ensuring that program regulations are being followed to implement your program. You will, as a sponsor, you are our point of contact. So any questions that we have, we do conduct program reviews or program audits to make sure that we can ensure that our sponsors are following program regulations. And so we would directly contact you as the sponsors, to get that scheduled and get that figured out. As the sponsor of the program, you work directly with us as far as claiming the meals, documentation of the program operations, all of that stuff. You really, as a sponsor, is really that overarching or that overseeing organization for that program. You are responsible for that program. As a summer feeding site, it is a slightly different operation, because if you were to go on the route of a summer feeding site under a different sponsor, that your working agreement would be with that sponsor, because you guys would be the ones that are working together, and the sponsor will need to ensure that you, as a summer feeding site, are following program regulations, providing the correct meals to eligible children, serving the meals to eligible children, all of that stuff. And then that relationship between the state agency then would be with that sponsor. So it's just really, I guess you could see it as a different oversight between a sponsor versus a summer feeding site. Great question.
Do you have any friends of the libraries that are sponsoring? Do you know?
I was actually talking with Dominique, the other summer feeding coordinator here in our department, because she was my predecessor. So she had been here with the state agency for a few years now, and she doesn't recall having a sponsor, a library as a sponsor, or a summer feeding site. And then really anything earlier than 2017, 2018, we don't know 100% if that's been the case, but as of right now, we do not have any sponsor of libraries or a summer feeding site here in Idaho.
Seems like it would be a good project for a friends group.
Yeah. Well, and actually, you know what, Emily, I actually take that back, because now that I'm remembering my previous position with the Idaho Food Bank, when I was a sponsor of the program, we actually had a summer feeding location at the Garden City Library. So we did just write down Mallard and Glenwood. Gosh, yeah, Glenwood. And so that feeding site though was under the Idaho Food Bank sponsorship. But yeah, thinking outside that, I think that has been the only one that I know of.
Thank you. Thank you. Stacy, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just, when you were talking about, if they're interested in being a site, they should reach out, to any sponsors in their area. But if they don't know who those sponsors are, can they contact you? And can they say, hey, I'm in St. Mary's, is this, what's going on in my area that you know of? And could you, sort of help connect people that way?
That's a great point to make, Stacey. And yes, I would be more than happy to do that. I think it's always nice to make those connections with someone that a sponsor already knows. And obviously, I work very close with them. And so, if that was something that you guys need help on, or just make that bridge that gap, bridge that communication, I would be more than happy to introduce everyone via email or even like a quick Zoom meeting, and just talk about different ways that that we can partner up and see what we can make happen, especially for the rural communities too, right? Like the smaller communities that may not have the same access as someone here in Boise or in Nampa or in the larger cities. I would be more than happy to do that. Yes, definitely.
Thanks. As a follow-up, Marianne, can you talk a little bit about the role that St. Vincent de Paul is playing as a sponsor? It's my understanding is they'll sponsor outside of their immediate area.
So St. Vincent de Paul, they are a sponsor of the summer food service program, and how our sponsor or how that sponsor have done it is they've actually identified different locations. Maybe it might be a social service agency. Maybe they might be doing a library location. I'm not 100% sure. But they've connected with those third-party organizations or local or not state agencies, but local social service agencies as a feeding site. And so that has been great, because then our contact there at St. Vincent de Paul, they provide that oversight, kind of what the state agency does for the whole state of Idaho. But Tina with St. Vincent de Paul, she provides that oversight for her feeding site locations. And so then she works with just relaying, any policy memo updates or any FYIs. She may be collecting the documentations of meal service. So then she can complete, program claims to get that reimbursement for each meals that they've served.
Thank you. And another question, can you explain the difference between offering meals and offering snacks? Great
question. So with the summer feeding program, as I mentioned earlier, there's various meal types that a sponsor and a feeding site can offer. So that can be a breakfast, a morning snack, lunch, an afternoon snack, or supper. What varies differently from let's talk about breakfast. How that differs from a snack meal is the components that needs to be served for a specific meal type. So for example, for the breakfast meal, they have to be served a minimum of a 8-ounce or 1 cup milk. So that's the minimum requirement. And then they have to serve either a fruit or a vegetable that's half a cup minimum serving, and then it has to be a grain. So either 1 slice of bread or, it's a minimum size of 1 ounce of that grain. How that differs with, let's say, the lunch meal. The lunch meal is the same thing for that meal component or the milk component. It has to be that 8-ounce or 1 cup meal serving. And then the 1 ounce or the 1 slice of grain, The fruit and vegetable combo, instead of a half a cup, it has to be a minimum of 3/4 cup, and it has to come from 2 different sources. So let's say apples and celery sticks, or maybe an orange and carrot sticks. But it has to be that 3/4 cup minimum requirement. And then you have to put in the meat alternate requirement. And so that is your, let's say the meat, tofu, that protein portion of the meal. It has to be at least 2-ounce meat alternate. And so that meal component is specific for the lunch and the supper. And then specifically for snacks, I believe it's also the grain, which is that 1 ounce, and then half a cup minimum requirement for the fruit and vegetable combo. The milk is not required. It's optional for the snack programs. And so it varies a little bit with the different meal type. And again, I can share that information, maybe Tammy and Emily, when I share this PowerPoint, I can add in that I have like a little 1-page little cheat sheet of the different components, size, minimum size for each meal type.
That would be wonderful. We'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
And do you offer menus that people can kind of prefab that people can kind of plug in?
That's a really great question. We don't have a specific menu that we've provided to sponsors or new sponsors coming on board or a summer feeding site. However, I can definitely connect, maybe the new sponsor coming on board with a nearby sponsor from the next community, and they can, answer, ask questions. I think that's always so helpful when you connect with your, counterparts, either a sponsor or a summer feeding site. And what's been really great with our sponsors here in Idaho is everyone is so helpful. They're just they're always, why recreate the wheel? We can provide, what has worked for us, what didn't. And so that's something that I heavily encourage. I did that a lot with when I was a sponsor of the program. I did something similar with the sponsor in Mountain Home. They utilized the menu that we had when I was a sponsor of the program, because again, why recreate the wheel? And that was something that they can do. And so that has been so helpful. So I can definitely make those connections with other program sponsors and get different ideas on the menu. What's really great is across Idaho, everyone has done very similar menus, but some have done various types. Some sponsors provide hot lunches, so you can you get those. Oh gosh, I'm trying to think on the top of my head, like maybe chili cheese dogs or just those hot lunches. But then a lot of sponsors, they provide cold lunches, so it's the individual package items of turkey sandwiches, maybe Uncrustables, those PB&J sandwiches. And so it really varies. But I think that's great, because then you have different options on what would work best for you. Because, you have to really take a look at your own, your own location. Do you have to think the logistics? Do you have the storage room? Do you have, maybe a kitchen? And you don't necessarily need to have a commercial kitchen, or a big kitchen to make hot lunches. If hot lunches does not work for you, you can do cold lunches. You can purchase individually packaged cold items. They deliver it to you frozen. You just thaw it out, and then you kind of create your menu to make sure that you're meeting that meal pattern. So then with that, you really have to think about storage capabilities. Do you have dry storage? Do you have cold storage or freezer storage? And so you really have to take a look at your own, your own space and see what is feasible for you on what kind of meals you're able to provide.
Yeah, that's a great lead into our next question, which what are requirements for meal site in terms of space, tables, chairs, room size, and things like the refrigerator, sinks and all that good stuff.
Yeah. So as far as, it varies in different regions across the state too, especially with your local, what are the requirements based on your local health district office, as far as like the sink and, what are those specific requirements. As far as the state agency goes, as long as you've met those requirements that you have locally as per your region for the health district, it's really just the storage capabilities. You can, and I'm kind of talking, when I was a sponsor of the program, we did a lot of park locations. And when we did those park locations and the housing complex too, when we did those locations, all we really had was equipment to transport the foods. Obviously, if you're transporting, cold milk, you want to make sure that you have coolers and ice packs and, to keep those temperatures all good. And then all we had was tables, just one folding table. And oh my goodness, Emily, I might have to step out for 1 second. My computer is dying on me, and it's a lot faster than I anticipated. But luckily, my desk is just right outside the door, so I can grab my charger really quick. And so if you wouldn't mind just giving me like 5 seconds just to grab
Sure.
my charger.
Yeah.
I apologize, everyone. Oh my gosh, my laptop.
No worries. Thanks.
Can I jump in for a minute?
Yes, please.
Tammy, did you want to say something?
Go ahead and interrupt.
Okay. I also want to point out, this is a kind of a tiered thing. So, the very top, more involved tier is being a sponsor. Then your next down tier would be partnering with a sponsor and being a site that, where they provide the food, you're basically distributing it and doing paperwork. And then, one thing that we haven't talked about is that bottom tier, and that is just to partner with a site where, they're handing out the meals, you're doing programming or handing out paperback books or, something where you're bringing the library to the kids at that site. So there's kind of those three different tiers. I just wanted to make sure everybody kind of knew. So if you weren't quite ready to take that leap, at the very top, maybe one of the other two tiers might work better for you this year.
Excellent.
All
Thank you, Stacy.
right. I apologize, everyone. I thought my laptop was going to survive not being plugged in, but I guess it didn't.
Okay, are you ready for a couple more questions?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Do sponsors or sites apply for the COVID waivers? And I'm not really certain about this question, but
I think what they're asking is opting in for the waivers. So if you are applying to be a sponsor of the program, part of your application process is opting in, or additional steps is opting in for the waivers. And so we provide steps on how to do that. If you are a feeding site, or if you would like to be a feeding site, that would fall, opting into these waivers, that would fall under the sponsor that you'll be working with.
thank you. Have grocery stores such as Winco or Albertsons provided sponsorships?
Going back to my slide of who can be a sponsor of the program. So you have to be a nonprofit organization or a local district. So sponsors, grocery stores, they don't qualify on becoming a sponsor. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't partake in the program. Local grocery stores are great assets. They can provide donations of food to the program. Sometimes, I'm kind of trying to think back, sometimes Albertsons or like the big grocery stores, they have staff that love to volunteer and do activities. And so that's also another way for local grocery stores helping out with the program. Not so much as a sponsor of a feeding site though, because they don't qualify, or at least as a sponsor, they don't qualify as a sponsor of the program.
And I think your local store can be a great friend when it comes to milk, right?
Oh yes, definitely. And I'm kind of going back to right before my laptop decides to die on me. I was mentioning just equipment. having the right equipment to transport food. If you are doing it on multiple locations, you want to make sure that you have that proper equipment to make sure that the foods that you have are safe under, the food safety regulations. And so local grocery stores are a great place to procure those items. Again, when I was a sponsor of the program, I definitely recruited local grocery stores to donate to the program. And they're always so willing to, it's such a great cause. It's such a great mission to just reaching more kids and making sure that they're fed during the summer months. And so I've always had great rapport with those local key stakeholders in the community.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so Katie wants to know is, would the library need to be a sponsor in order to choose what food is served, to create a menu?
That's a great question. That's a really good question. Potentially, I think it would depend on, let's say, if maybe a feeding site is something that you're kind of thinking as like the first step. There might be a way to work out with a sponsor and garner some ideas on different menu items that could happen. Something to keep in mind though, with the sponsors, a lot of the times with their menu items, it's pretty set earlier or way in advance before summer operations happens, because they do have to place those orders with their vendors and the manufacturers. And so for the most part, those menus are usually pretty set by like come summertime or springtime. But sometimes they do procure items from their local grocery stores. Maybe if they are running out with milk, as we were just mentioning, or even fruit and veggies. So there might be some slight variation of the menu. But if you want specifically like, specific items or specific food items to be combined together, that it might be ideal to kind of look into the sponsor side of the program, but it's always worth a try to have that conversation with the sponsor and see if they would be if they would be open to the idea of some suggestions for different menu items.
Thank you. We had a question about whether Bill could be used, and then Stacy mentioned that the Bluemobile in the Wood River Valley provides both meals and books and partners with libraries. So
They do, yeah. Our school district partner there, the Blaine County School District, I believe has a pretty awesome relationship with the Blaine County Hunger Coalition, and providing additional services as well. And as I mentioned earlier with my presentation, I think thinking outside the box of just providing meals, but really those enrichment activities and incentives too, right? Like if you have books or I don't know, like dodgeball or basketball, that the kids can utilize. I think providing those extra incentives will increase participation and really just encourage families to feel welcome to. I think from my experience working with families and children experiencing food insecurity or in low income neighborhood, trust can be a big thing, and sometimes they don't have that initial trust to support or assistance. And so I think, if you think about becoming a sponsor or a feeding site, making it a very welcoming environment, making it really enjoyable and not just to get a free meal, it will change that perspective, I think, for families and the kiddos. Because again, it's more enjoyable, it's more welcoming, there's trust there, they're not feeling like they're being labeled as like, oh, I'm someone who needs this program. But, really just providing that welcoming atmosphere with just incentives, activities, friendly atmosphere, I think will make such a huge difference.
mhm. Mhm. Thank you.
So can you just confirm then that a bookmobile can be used as a site?
Oh, yes, yes, definitely.
All right, Julie mentioned that while working in another state, they had the option to continue the program during the school year or after school. Does Idaho have this option?
Mm. And I always have to like think of it under pre-COVID or during COVID and then post-COVID, right? Because as I mentioned on my presentation, that we do have flexibilities right now that allows for example, right now our school districts are operating the summer feeding program during the school year. In a normal setting, that typically won't happen because summer feeding program is really the whole purpose of it is summer operation. Sometimes when, let's say, unanticipated school closure happens, so let's say maybe a snowstorm or a natural disaster happen where the school meals program is unable to operate, summer feeding program can step in and be the program that offers these meals to the kiddos. And so to that question, as far as operation during the school year, right now under COVID, it is allowable. Pre-COVID, it would only occur during the school year if there was an unanticipated school closure that occurs. Again, natural disaster or anything in that realm of situation. But for the most part, it's a summer operation of usually June through August.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit just briefly about the at-risk after-school meals program?
So the at-risk after-school program is through our child and adult care food program. And I am not too 100% confident talking about that program quite yet because my brain has been focused in the summer feeding world. But that is a possibility through the child and adult care food program to provide as an after-school meals program access during the school year. And if that is something that someone is interested in, our lead coordinator, Kim Sherman, she's amazing. Oh my gosh, she knows all the ins and outs of the child and adult care food program and the at-risk after-school program. And I can share that information too, in case you guys have more specific questions in regard to that.
Thank you so much. Stacy, do you have anything else?
Yes, I do, actually. I know this can seem a little overwhelming, and there is paperwork, but lots and lots of libraries, not just in Idaho, but throughout the nation. This is a huge trend right now. Libraries are making it work, and if the CSLP, the Collaborative Summer Library Program that we're all the public libraries in Idaho are members of that. They have a Facebook page just for libraries offering summer meals. So I encourage you to check that out because it gives some specific examples of what you can do. There's even a special banner in your artwork folder on your USB drive this year that are like libraries and summer meals with the Tales and Tales artwork already made for you. So check that out. And yeah, there's just hundreds and hundreds of libraries are doing this now. So it is possible. Just it would be a matter of, talking with Emily, talking with me, talking with Mary Ann. I'm going to even throw Tammy under the bus because she knows a lot about this too. Talking with somebody and sort of just brainstorming, working things out. Figuring out, who might be possible sponsors in your area if you can't swing being a sponsor yourself. We try to look for things like retirement homes who have kitchens, or, not during COVID, but during a normal time. You know, look for other kinds of organizations, Boys and Girls Club, other community centers, rec centers, you know, the YMCA, places that might have a kitchen or refrigeration or the ability to provide those meals, and then you would, you know, you could distribute them. So I think partnerships is a big key here as well. And we're happy to talk through ideas with you. And I have
Yeah.
to jump on another meeting. So I want to
Oh,
just say thank you so much, everybody. And if anybody has questions for me, I'm putting my email in there. You're welcome to contact me or Emily. And yeah, I'd love to see more of you doing summer meals this year.
thanks, Stacy. I was going to mention to what Stacy was talking about. If you guys are considering being a sponsor or a summer feeding site, what's really awesome right now, as I mentioned earlier, that our school districts are currently operating the summer feeding program. And so if in your local community, if you're just curious how the meal service goes, how the menu looks, you know, all of those kind of stuff, this is actually a great time to contact those local schools and just say, hey, possibly thinking, you know, becoming a sponsor or maybe even a feeding site. Would you be okay if I come in, you know, during lunch service and just take a look at your menu? Or some of them are doing community grab and go meals, which means that they're doing, they're not only doing in cafeteria meal service, but they're also doing community feeding, which is essentially what you would be doing as a feeding site during the summer months. So you can check in with those schools too to see, hey, are you doing community grab and go? You know, if so, would you mind if I just like kind of, you know, drive by and kind of just take a look at your operation? This is really a great time to kind of just get that firsthand experience and visually see how the operation occurs. And so I heavily encourage contacting your local schools to see if that is something that you might be able to just kind of tag along and watch from the sideline. And then the other thing too that Stacey mentioned, as far as, you know, let's say maybe a sponsorship is not feasible for you. And let's say there isn't a sponsor in your community. On top of what Stacey was mentioning, as far as resource centers or the Boys and Girls Club, local food pantries, senior centers, for the most part, churches. Churches are also a great organizations to be a sponsor of the program, and they would be a great avenue to create that partnership as well. And so really think of just different agencies. As I mentioned earlier, you know, food pantries, they're already in that realm of food insecurity and food access. They know the need. They know how many kids, how many children are low income and who's experiencing food insecurity. And so you already have a fellow advocate, a fellow champion in your community. And so if that's something that maybe if there isn't a summer feeding program in your community, maybe starting that up with other local social agencies to be able to upstart that, I think would be a great way to really collaborate and you know put the heads together and see what we can come up with.
That's great. I think does anyone have any more questions? Any other questions? Okay, I don't see any. I think we've gotten to all of them. Marianne, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about summer food service with us. We really appreciate it. And as Stacy said, I hope we have some libraries joining.
I do too. I mean, it is definitely, you know, we totally understand it is definitely a weird year to start anything new or to even, you know, just even make connections, you know, because physical distancing, social distancing, you know, all of that stuff that's happening right now. So if it's not a possibility this year, totally okay. The summer feeding program will always be here. And if this is something that we can revisit next year and really just talk about, really how the program operates in a traditional manner, in a normal setting, as opposed to going back and forth between what the flexibilities are, what the leniencies are. I would be more than happy to do this over again next year, and really build that connection. I think this is an untapped resource, or an untapped partnership that we've dabbled in a little bit, but I think there's so much potential on what we can do. And so I just really look forward to working with you all. And Tammy and Emily, I will share the information, my PowerPoint, the menu, nutrition component, and all of that stuff, and my contact information. And please feel free to reach out to me if you want to have more of a detailed conversation. As Stacy mentioned, it is a lot of information, for a meeting via Zoom, and there's a lot of moving parts. And so if it's a little bit better to just have a one-on-one conversation, I would be more than happy to do that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
I'm going to go ahead and do just a quick screen share here, just to give you a little bit more information as we end today. Don't know why it's not working well here. Sorry about that. Just a reminder that you will be prompted at the end with a survey. All of our professional development events at the Idaho Commission for Libraries do require that we collect and report what you have learned, how you felt about this. We'll send you a link to this webinar in about a week. And from that link, there's also, you can see previous webinars that we've hosted. And I want to make sure that you see this slide. So next month, I'm really excited about this. Several of our staff members have been working to put together this webinar next month on April the 19th. And it's called Looking for Mirrors in the Library. And it's about collection development to support Indigenous patrons, and also collections that are needing an upgrade for Indigenous types of materials. It should just be really fantastic. So please, please save this date. It should be really great. Once again, Marianne, thank you so much. Emily, thank you. Thank you all for joining us here at the Idaho Commission for Libraries. It's always a pleasure to see you here and to see your excitement about these great programs. So thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.